Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to our YWCA Facebook Live event. I'm Laura Gomez Horton, Clinical Director of the YWCA Greater Austin. For those who are unfamiliar, YWCA Greater Austin provides individual, couple, family, and group therapy, school-based services, care coordination, life skills classes, consultation, training, advocacy, and maintains a warm line. We have been in the Central Texas area for 115 years, and our mission is the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. Our programming stands at the intersection of mental health and social justice. Thank you for joining our Connect, Heal, Learn speaker series, which are monthly interviews where we join with subject matter experts to expand awareness and begin to move forward collectively. These conversations are held the second Friday of each month. Today, we continue the series with two special guests, Candance Matthews, Arborist and Conservationist, and Dave Cortez, Director, Lone Star Chapter of the Sierra Club. In recognition of Earth Day later this month, we will be looking at the connection among mental health, environmental oppression, conservation, and ways to heal collectively. Candance, Dave, welcome. Would you each like to introduce yourselves?
I'll go first, Dave. So my name is Candance Matthews, and my career in conservation started back in 2014 with Texas Conservation Corps, and we worked in projects in New Mexico doing invasive species removal. We worked in Austin and throughout Texas, predominantly on the Violet Crown Trail, which goes right through parts of Austin. We also worked in Arkansas and Oklahoma, and that was doing invasive species removal, and we did some chainsaw projects and wildfire mitigation. Also, I am a certified arborist, and my career in arboriculture started in 2015 in Austin. I work for a company called They Might Be Monkeys, and what an arborist does is all aspects of tree care. I'm involved with pruning, hazard tree removal. We do a lot of deadwood removal. We also do planting and soil work, oak wilt mitigation. I'm the 2018 Texas Tree Climbing Female Champion, and I'm competing again in a couple months, so I'm stoked on that. And my career in arboriculture also brought me to New Zealand, where I worked on the South Island, and I was based out of Christchurch. And very similar, we worked on trees. I did pruning, removals, all of that. Right now, I'm in Austin. It's a bit unconventional. I'm working out of my truck. So yeah, that's me.
Welcome, Candance. Dave? How about you?
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Candace, I think I want my daughter to see that tree climbing competition because she's starting to explore what that might be like. So let me know where that is. Dave Cortez, he, him, his pronouns. I'm in South Austin, born and raised in El Paso. I say born, raised, and trained. That's where I learned living life and organizing. And today I'm lucky to still be doing that work. I work for the Sierra Club Lone Star Chapter, the Texas Sierra Club, which is the Texas branch of the National Sierra Club. And I'm our new director here in Texas. I've been with the organization since 2011, done a lot of different things, community organizing on the doors of Sunset Heights in El Paso, working with people who were living under the shadows of the Asarco copper smelter, which poisoned our community and employed many people in our community for over a century. Here in Austin, done a lot of work with environmental groups and labor unions, trying to build bridges between folks that, if y'all remember when the Keystone XL pipeline fight started, it was a lot of, chingazos and not getting along. So we work to build bridges and find commonalities between our different bases of rank and file folks. Fighting coal plants, fighting pipelines, like the sister pipeline of the Dakota Access Pipeline out in West Texas, actually, it's going very close to Big Bend, the Trans-Pecos Pipeline. And then, really just trying to work to recenter people specifically marginalized people, like folks back home, folks that look like us, folks that are struggling to pay bills, folks that are left behind when hurricanes hit, folks that don't have the resources to repair their homes when the winter storms and the heat waves hit, and you name it. There's millions of Texans out there that are left behind. And historically, the environmental movement has only given some lip service to working with folks. And often it was for folks, not without their consent, not alongside them. And so we're doing a lot of work to change that. We're trying to fix the grid through people-centered equity lenses that center what we call just transition away from a extraction-based economy, and really work with people to help them find their own skills to advocate for change. And so I'm happy to talk about that today.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to you both. It sounds like we're going to have a good time here. One of the things I like to start with is to hear a little bit about people's experiences. And many times people choose a work path, or a work path chooses them, depending on how you see it, because of their life experiences. So I want to take you all back a little bit to think back about where your passion for conservationism and the environment work originated for you, and what story is connected to where you are now.
Sure. I'll kick it off. It's a few points. I remember always getting frustrated with my dad when we'd be out riding the banks of the Rio Grande, that he wouldn't go fast enough. I just wanted to ride as fast as I could. And he was stopping and looking at the birds and pointing out the clouds and this and that. And later in life, I figured out, like, oh, that's actually really interesting. He and my mom and my siblings, we would go out storm chasing in the sandhills in the desert of Santa Teresa, Anapra and Sunland Park areas, right on the other side of the river, and would turn the radio dial all the way to the left, the AM, where there's nothing, so you can hear the lightning, you can hear the static. And that started my interest and love affair with the weather, and camping and being out. I mean, if you grow up in El Paso, the mountains are there. They're your backyard. I could literally, in my later years there, just walk out, find an arroyo, and just start walking with my dogs, and end up, halfway up the mountain in just 30 minutes. But what really started to transform and was the kicker for me, because okay, fine, hiking, protecting, that's good. It was learning how, one, only certain people had access to these kinds of things, and two, there were people that were making money off of destroying these special places and harming my community at the same time. And so for many years, I was motivated by resentment, by anger, of feeling just downright upset, that people were doing that, that they were getting away with it. I was watching workers get poisoned, family members who worked at these plants sick, end up passing away. And then you see that it's happening all over the place. And that stuff really, that was, iron cutting iron. That forged my will to do this work. And even more so, just seeing how many people are excluded from the process inherently, it feeds me daily. But it all goes back to that time with family, with the land, in just being reconnected to our roots.
I would like to say that my foray into conservationism started rather unconventionally. I actually didn't go camping for the first time until I was 26 years old. And at that point, I had taken a road trip with a friend out west to Big Bend country. I had sort of a ragtag supply of gear. I think the shoes I was wearing were some old skate shoes. I rolled my ankles a couple times on my way to Emery Peak. That did not deter me. And seeing that was the first national park I ever went to. that was the first time seeing the desert, seeing the Chisos Mountains, looking at Ocotillo, all of the flora and fauna of Big Bend country, seeing Marfa and all of the areas out there in West Texas was what inspired me to join the Texas Conservation Corps. From there, it was kind of a serendipitous way I got into tree work on 5th Street in Austin. I used to be a pretty avid cyclist. I rode my bike by this company, They Might Be Monkeys, Texas Tree and Land Co. And I decided one day to go in and talk to them and see what they were all about. And at that point, I met my boss, Nevik Donnelly, and he got me into tree work. And from there, I competed in the climbing competitions in Texas, and I went to New Zealand. And yeah, that's kind of how I started in conservation work. It was later in life. I didn't have a childhood filled with outdoor activities. I grew up between two households, and neither one of my parents was very outdoorsy. My summers were spent in the inner city on hot asphalt. So it wasn't until later in life that I developed an affinity for nature, hiking, and camping. And I found in some ways that has helped me not take anything for granted and become very passionate and committed to nature and the environment.
Thank you, Candace. I mean, that totally, validates what Dave is saying about access to green spaces, to nature, that, you came across it by luck because the opportunities had not been there for you prior to it, which is very similar to what a lot of people experience, especially people who do live in urban areas, that, asphalt is the best thing that they have to stand on, unfortunately. So
yep.
Thank you for
Asphalt,
sharing.
a big chlorine pool. That's where I spent my summers.
Yeah.
It was actually in Eastern Pennsylvania. I grew up partially in Allentown, which is one of those Rust Belt cities side of Philadelphia. So and everything in life I've had to sort of learn on my own in terms of outdoor experience. So yeah.
Yeah, it's another community also riddled with what Dave had mentioned, where it brings jobs to the community, but at the same time, it's hurting the community. I was actually in transitioning to this, I was reading an article that states that our society as a whole has a long history and belief that natural and human resources exist for exploitation. Our whole country was built on exploitation and commodification and control, to fuel the economic growth. I know, Dave, you touched a little bit on this already, but what are some thoughts around how our society perpetuates the environmental crisis that we're living in right now, and how historically we've done this and we continue to do it?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I mean, it's two parts. One, we live under late stage capitalism, where there is a strain on resources, meaning people will do anything and everything to try and find it, to mine it, and to sell it. I was looking at pictures this morning of Lake Bomer, I think is how you pronounce it. It's out in West Texas. It's basically an abandoned.
Balmorhea?
No. Balmorhea is where that's my ancestral homeland. That's a special place. Lake Bomer is an abandoned oil well that has just grown into this artificial lake with levels of hydrogen sulfide that are so high that in the middle of that, basically you die if you breathe the air right above that lake. And on the perimeter of it, if you're exposed to it for a few minutes, you can get really sick. And it's just an example of our extractive colonial mindset that has existed for quite a long time, for hundreds of years. Whether it's people used as resources, stolen, captured, chained, and shipped across oceans, or murdered in genocide or enslaved for gold mining. We have a long history of those in power using those without power to their own benefit and need. And it's not slowing down. For example, we're fighting the climate crisis. We need to figure out ways to reduce CO2 emissions, and we want to do things like electric vehicles, which that's great. Solar power, which is great, but it's all connected to resource extraction. But it's fundamentally not going to serve the people who are most on the margins, which is a problem that we have in general public policymaking at large, or even in academic institutions or other spaces. People might believe that we can't make policy for people at the margins, and that kind of stuff is what really drives this extractive economy that we live in. I see it in Austin. It happened yesterday with the airport. There's a certain constituency of folks that want to perpetuate and facilitate the growth of this economy at the expense of another set of people who live adjacent to the jet fuel storage tank farms that are going to be built, 2 now and up to 4 in the next few years. You can't do those things without harming people, is what we're told. And we go forward and go ahead and do those things. We adopt policy in those ways. And we only give lip service to the concerns of the people who are most affected. And we always prioritize capital and wealth, which is it's a bad thing. Let's just put it that way. It's not the values I have. It's not the values that many of us have. We care about our neighbors. We care about our community. But when we want to affect decision-making, we're up against very powerful moneyed interests, like, airline industries, for example. And it's very difficult for, a working class person who's taking care of 3 grandkids while their kid is at work, to be able to get into the halls of the city and actually, be heard. And I'll stop there because this thing will get me going pretty hard.
That's okay.
And I guess relating it more maybe to my line of work, a lot of these short-sighted, economically motivated interests dominate the decisions made. And I find this in terms of, especially in conservation, we do a lot of tree planting, which is more of a reactive strategy to what decisions are being made in terms of deforestation, and loss of biodiversity in the forest. So what would probably be more helpful would be to preserve the forests as we already have, because larger trees are able to sequester carbon much more effectively than smaller trees. And in the United States, currently only 6 to 7% of forests are actually naturally intact forests, which means that they're in wilderness and national park areas. The forest harvesting is highest in the southern United States, which is parts of the area that I have worked on in the Conservation Corps. And I think that's how I see it in terms of policies. Yeah.
I mean, I think that, in the last few years, we went through a huge shift in opening up those protected lands and giving access to capitalism and people that want that land for resources. And in the same vein that we're talking here, it seems that environmental oppression, at least the way that I understand it, whereas there's this lack of green spaces, and what you were talking about, Dave, where there's these practices that expose lower income families, communities of colors to the toxic facilities, the pipelines, highways built right across their homes. And it just continues to be perpetuated. So I think I just wanted to continue that conversation a little bit more, because I know we see it very often, at least here in Austin where we are, that homes are bought out and there's gentrification. And I know in my neighborhood, when I moved here about 20 years ago, there is a lot less greenery around me. There's less cows around me, because where I'm living, there used to be cows on my way to my house, and now there's not. There's no more ranch lands around. So I think that's why I just wanted to continue that conversation a little bit more.
Well, it's important for everyone in Austin to not just acknowledge and not just recognize that we're on unceded, occupied territories of the Tankua and the Comanche, in the Lipan Apache, the Coahuiltecan, the Carrizo, and other native peoples. This corridor from Round Rock to Tijuana in San Antonio and the Springs is a very special place. And people were here before, the good old Davy Crockett and others came in, as we like to talk about in the many different Texas history classes we take in public education as kids in this state. But as the city evolved, downtown, that was full of Black and brown folks. You all know about the 1928 master plan. Mm-hmm. And when people wanted to retake that, they moved them to the east side. Mm-hmm. And over time, they zoned it for industry. So you get the Holly Power Plant, you get the major international oil companies and their tank farms over off Springdale. You get recycling plants, you name it, it goes on and on and on. That's where, you brown, Black folks, that's where you're allowed to live. Well, they fight for their rights and their health and their fundamental well-being of their communities and their families. And they get those things shut down and moved. And then it's time for the colonizing class to come back, right? And that's what we've been seeing with the wave of gentrification. We call them new pilgrims, because they look at the land like Elon Musk looks at Boca Chica in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, and they see nothing. They just see something that they can redevelop or use or make in their own eyes, ignoring that it's a sacred site, ignoring that there were people there before them and cultures connected to the land there, and they make it their own. And so we're only seeing that more and more in these cities, in our city in particular, with rapid growth, with the facilitation by the city and the county for investments in rapid growth, without actually helping the people who are at the margins, who are already here, who've been here for generations and want to continue to raise their families here. We see this disparity just widen at a rapid pace. And it's not about changing the character of the city and hoping for some heyday. It's that we're willing to just go ahead and erase people like the original settlers of these lands did, just in a nicer, money-making kind of way, and maybe less visibly violent.
Yeah, well, I was just going to piggyback off of Dave and saying that in terms of redlining, the area west of Interstate 35, the tree canopy coverage there is 78%. And in East Austin, the area east of 35, it's only 22%. And that was due to what he was talking about, the zoning, which said it was an industrial area. And there's so many benefits of increased canopy in that area. It's led to higher temperature rises in other cities, and temperatures in dense urban areas can often be 13 degrees higher than in areas with fuller canopy tree coverage. So yeah,
it's wild. And just park space, even, as you were mentioning, Laura, it's, we were working with the Springdale Airport Neighborhood Association a couple years ago. These are just folks who would hike up a hill, and they called it Hungry Hill in La Loma. And it was a beautiful view of the city. You could see everything. For a while, we called it East Austin's Mount Bunnell, because you could see the whole city. But it was riddled with oil, with tires, with roofing materials, with construction debris. It was a dump an illegal dump that was started by the city for disposing aggregate and rocks many years ago. And then people just went ahead and piled on. It was this beautiful land. And it'd been like that growing for 50 years, just everybody dumping their stuff there. You know, they don't get the same quality of green space. There's no Zilker Park, at least until Reguerero was built. There was no big green space like that on the east side. There was no need to invest in those people over there because folks were pretty isolated everywhere else. And now that people are moving in and they have more power and access to capital and influence, yeah, we're seeing, you know, some pocket parks and some cleanups happen. I mean, we've had to fight like hell, not just to clean up Red Bluff, but to make sure that it's there for the people of the community that have been there, that it's one, not developed, which some members of the city council wanted to do, and two, that the people who grew up around it can still afford to live there and use it and maybe get to enjoy it in a clean way for some of the first years and times of their life.
Yeah, I mean, definitely everything that y'all are talking about is just amazing that it continues to happen. And I think even with our awareness, it's still happening. And I don't think that people either make the connection or they know the connection and don't care about the connection to people's wellness. I think, you know, we've been focusing a lot on, you know, the local area, the Austin area, because that's what we're familiar with. But I know that this is happening all over Texas. And Dave, you mentioned the Rio Grande, Candance, you mentioned Big Bend, all that. I know that there's so much going on at the border and the border regions all throughout the border of Texas. Animals are being endangered or extinct because we're changing the wetlands, we're changing, you know, the water sources down there and with everything we're bringing. But you're right. I mean, people come in, they see land, they don't care what they're displacing or who they're displacing. And that includes, you know, from animals to humans to history. So I don't know why I started saying that. I think I just wanted to summarize everything we've been talking about because
Sure.
I wanted to make the connection because a lot of times people ask, well, why an interest in environmentalism or conservationism? And to me, it's because there's a big connection to people's mental health and well-being. I see the connection that with the lack of green spaces, it causes more, there's research that shows lack of green spaces cause more depression and anxiety. Candace was mentioning higher temperatures with the lack of canopy. That, you know, higher temperatures is connected to domestic violence, and there's higher rates of domestic violence because people have, you know, more anxiety, you know, they're less regulated emotionally. So it just increases, it's just so interconnected with mental health, with societal stressors, all those things. And we know that healthy environments are crucial in that mind-body connection and for us to be able to thrive physically and mentally and to start healing stressors that may be impacting us. Do you all see this connection between the natural environment as a mechanism to heal and connect?
I would say yes, from a personal perspective. I have noticed my mental health vastly increasing when I started to do this line of work. And it's also based in science too. We see a connection between soil microbes and an increase in higher serotonin levels. And that involves working with your hands in the soil, which I do a lot of. And this effect can last up to 3 weeks. There's also something based out of Japan called forest bathing. And this is just practicing mindfulness while you're in the forest. And trees and also plants release a chemical which also interacts with our immune system and can improve our sleep and lift our mood and boost creativity. So there is science behind nature helping elevate our mental health. And yeah, that's how I see it from a personal perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I think you could argue that like one of the greatest crimes against humanity is removing people from the land and putting us in concrete jungles, putting us in fluorescent lighting in boxes, and forgetting what we are. And we are inherently of the land. We are, as Carl Sagan so famously talked about, space dust. We're just a bunch of chemicals together, and we can recharge, we can reconnect with our ancestors, the spirit of our ancestors, the spirit of our community through the land, just as you mentioned, Candance, just even through touching it, through walking through it. And it's a key part of a lot of the work that I'm part of. I mean, I carry a part of West Texas with me everywhere I go, because that is going to power us through and will overcome the weight of influence and power of those that we're trying to defeat, frankly. When we talk about multinational billion-dollar corporations that allow for injustice to thrive, we need something stronger than that. And it's not going to be fighting fire with fire. It's going to be our relationship with the land and each other. And as we defend the land, it will feed us. It will nourish us. It's a beautiful thing. And there's other elements to this, though. It's not just having access to green space, as you all know. It's having access to healthy food, decent food that maybe you don't have to buy at the bread basket. Or the corner tienda. Like, how long has Del Valle been asking for a grocery store? Yet out in towards Dripping Springs, it hasn't been long. They're getting a new HEB at the old Nutty Brown. Those are decisions made purely by capital, not to serve people. And it's shameful. It's an injustice. And when you have that, and people having to commute for a long way to go work building the city, this emerald city that they can't afford to live in, that's a longer period of time that they're away from their kids. The cost of living goes up, the cost of childcare goes up, so they've got to work even more, maybe be away for days at a time, or have an older kid watch the other kids. These domino effects are very real. When you have lack of access to vaccines and PPE or education about it. I saw a staggering statistic from Austin Public Health about 38% of Austin's Black community being vaccinated, and yet the city continues on. We just go on as if, we're growing. There's great things happening, and let's just move forward. Maybe we'll address those things. But it really robs us of a rich, authentic culture. And I think we're in a moment, not just in Austin, but in Texas and in many places. What is our culture? What is our identity? We go out to the land every now and then we're back to the concrete lifestyle, the technological lifestyle. But we really have to account for these things. Lack of access to health insurance, quality education, secondary education, childcare, you name it. All of that are burdens that folks most impacted by pollution in the climate crisis face daily. Yet much of the work of the advocacy community out there on those issues does not reach those folks. It helps to have people that maybe have lived those experiences in leadership. And I hope to see more women, queer folks, Black and brown folks in positions of leadership, not just in city elected offices and state elected offices, but in the nonprofits around, so we can flip that paradigm and serve people better.
Candance, you want to add anything?
So can you tell me what the question was again?
Oh my God, I forgot the question too. It was around the mind-body connection and healing, the healing aspects of green spaces, and to see if you, if that resonated with you, that the natural environment as a mechanism to heal and connect.
Yeah, and as I was saying before, the lack of green spaces leads to a decrease in overall mental health. We could see the areas with lower tree canopy coverage have an increased rate of obesity, even type 2 diabetes, I was reading too. The study that was recently put out by I believe it was the city of Austin, and they were using GIS technology to create a heat map of the entire city. And you could see that the areas east of I-35, which were historically redline, are far greater temperatures than those west. So I think you could see that put into practice in Austin. And yeah, that's
yeah. I had heard, Candace, that part of your healing process or your mental health maintenance is camping solo. Is that something you do?
Oh, so yeah. So that's something I've done a lot out west. And I'll say that I'm a conservationist in Texas, but it's difficult to say that since only 4% of public land in Texas is considered public land, and that number is decreasing with eminent domain laws out west and in Texas. So a lot of my hiking and camping experiences have been in New Mexico and New Zealand. But I've just found that as a woman going out into the wilderness alone has helped me in terms of helping improve my sleep cycle. It's helped with my moods. I've been practicing mindfulness while out in nature. And yeah, I think that's something that not a lot of people get to experience. And it wasn't until later in life that I got to do that. And that's how nature has helped me in my own travels.
Wonderful. So I think, Dave, you've mentioned a couple of times about how do we involve other people? You know, how do we involve everybody in this in eliminating the environmental injustices that occur? So how do we involve diverse populations to get involved with conservationism and environmentalism when, like you said, most of their day is spent working or traveling to and from work. And even if they do have access to a green space, they don't have time to go out there and take a walk or anything like that. So
yeah, there was a beautiful moment during the city council testimony yesterday against the tank farm at the airport, when Rocio Villalobos, Lindsay Porter, and another gentleman, I have his name written down. Well, first they spoke. Rocio spoke eloquent words about her life living and her family living near the old tank farms. And Lindsay and this other gentleman just went ahead and played an audio recording of folks from the McCall Lane community, in their words, just played it for these very powerful people in City Hall, what their concerns were. And, you know, I love that. Like, that's exactly one way to show solidarity, to, you know, take your time if you have PTO and go to City Hall and let these folks' own words speak. And that's great. I encourage every one of y'all that are out there listening to look into what's called the Jemez Principles for Democratic Organizing, like Jemez de Mexico or Jemez, Jemez. They really help articulate it's 6 principles, ways to answer your question, Laura. There's also the environmental justice principles and the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, undoing racism principles. You know, there's some concepts in there about that will really help folks just read them and think through, okay, this has been figured out already. So fundamentally, especially for a lot of Austin's educated class of advocates who, you know, very smart people who claim to have a lot of answers, zip it and go out and listen. Just go listen to people who are either concerned about an issue, whether it's tank farms, gentrification and displacement, or whatever, and just go listen. Go to a meeting, go to a neighborhood meeting, introduce yourself, and ask for permission if you can listen, and get educated from the folks on the ground about their lived experience and what's going on. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to sell anything, but go learn. And as you do that and build trust, maybe you might be able to do some things like offer resources, maybe help folks see another side of the debate or the issue and build trust. And ultimately what you're going to see with, even like with a lot of, there's Democrats and Republicans and Greens and Libertarians, and you name it, we all actually have a lot in common. And when you cut through the noise, you'll see those common values. So by following those principles. So start small, talk to your neighbors. If you live in an apartment complex, we're hi, we say hi, we're going to the car, whatever, and then that's it. But you have no idea who's living next to you. Most people don't, especially younger folks. Take time, go just get to know people. It's difficult. It's part of us being isolated and moved away from the land and from each other. We have to break that. Get talking, and then start to use these principles to branch out. And at the Sierra Club, we'll help you. That's a fundamental premise of our work, is building as I told Annie yesterday, a net that works. So, a community of people, so we can practice these things, say what works, what doesn't, and support each other as we try and figure these questions out. And then you turn the demands of those folks that you're speaking with, you stand behind them. You leverage your power behind the power of those that lack it, and you move towards shared goals.
I also have some resources to add to anyone that wants to get involved with the tree community in Austin. Tree Folks is a great organization to look into. They do a ton of community tree plantings. They do a lot of tree ID walks. They have an urban forest steward program, and they have a lot of tree care resources online. There is different projects throughout Austin. They promote the Central Texas Floodplain Restoration Program. You could look into that, and that is on their website. They also have the Lost Pines program in conjunction with Texas Conservation Corps, which I was a part of, and we planted over 2 million loblolly pines, and those were areas affected by the 2011 and 2015 wildfires in Bastrop. Some other organizations to look into is the Neighborwoods, and that's in subjunction with Tree Folks, and they give away 5-gallon trees for Austin residents to adopt. You could look on their website for that. The city of Austin also has Wood Reclamation Day, which is where they give away wood to artisans and woodworkers, artists in Austin that have been from removals in the city. So those are all different resources you could look into if you want to get involved in the tree community.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think what we're kind of talking about here, and what I heard from both of you, is involvement and community and connection, because I think that, again, historically, we're taught to be individuals and to be individualistic. And as long as we're individualistic, like, you all were saying, we're not talking to each other. We're just thinking of ourselves, and we're not thinking of the larger community. So collectively, we can work together to make some improvements and some changes. I know we spent some time talking about conservationism, environmental oppression, and the connection with mental health. And we're kind of wrapping things up here. Do you all have any last comments that you would like to share that maybe we didn't touch upon?
I'll say briefly, I think it's really important to rekindle and touch into intergenerational power, not just thinking 7 generations forward and 7 generations past, but in our community, there's no greater wisdom out there aside from the land than our elders. In Montopolis, when we were working to prevent a local developer from destroying the Montopolis School for Negro Children, that's what it's called. Meeting people who went to that school, who still lived in the community, who had their kids, and still there, and just getting to know them and talking to them and hearing their stories it's incredibly powerful. I'm so grateful for those opportunities. But bring your kids along into that. And for folks of older generations who are in leadership, who've been doing this stuff and feel a lot of ownership over your organization or your cause, you need to work to open the doors to let the younger folks in. And I'm 38. I'm not young. It is my job at the Sierra Club to immediately open the doors to folks younger than me. And when I say youth, I'm talking kiddos. I'm not talking the college kids. I'm talking the young ones. And we have to be more intentional about all of our advocacy, all of our education that we're doing to make it intergenerational.
So yeah, I would just like to give some recommendations for some books and podcasts and movies for anyone who's interested in learning more about arboriculture. The first book I would recommend is called The Golden Spruce, and that explores conservation up in the Vancouver, sort of British Islands area of Canada, and it talks a lot about the Indigenous culture and a special tree that actually got it explores a tree and also an environmental eco-terrace in that area, and the reasoning behind why he felled this sacred tree. It's a fascinating book. Another one is called The Hidden Life of Trees, and that explores how trees communicate using the mycorrhizae network, which is underground roots. And finally, the podcast I would suggest is by Dr. Ed Gilman. He does a video series online, and he talks just a lot about pruning and tree practices you could use at home on your own trees. And that's it for me.
Thank
Awesome.
you. I
Thank
really
you so
appreciate everything you all have shared. And I know that this conversation needs to keep going, of course. I do want to come back to real quickly, how Dave was saying about the bringing in the kids and the younger generations, because I think both of you shared your inspirations as, children, and maybe you didn't know at that moment, and, reflecting back now as adults that, Candance could see that she didn't have that access until much later in life. And Dave, you couldn't appreciate what your parents were showing you until a little bit later in life, that at that moment, it's like, why is he stopping to see the trees and the birds? But the younger generation's exposure, even if we don't see the impact right now and right here, it'll carry forward within them as we're teaching them how to be more conservation minded and environmentally minded. So I want to thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts and your efforts. And I'd also like to remind everyone that the connection between the environment and mental health is very much connected with our mind-body wellness. And if you're feeling a bit out of sorts, there might be an environmental reason for it. And also, if you would like to contact us and access some services, we do offer mental health services, as well as an opportunity to get involved in social justice issues and to eliminate racism and empower communities. If you want to keep the conversation going, also every month we do monthly dialogues on issues of racism and discrimination. And the next one is on April 29th at 12 to 1:30. And topic is to be determined still, but hopefully you can join us and can keep this community conversation going. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate everything.